Bonjour and welcome, viewers and students, to Let's Speak French, Parlons Français. These lessons on basic French are short and easy, and if you follow the program regularly, I can assure you that very soon you will be able to understand French quite easily. The previous session focused on direct object pronouns known as complément d'objet direct or simply c'est, au, they in French. In today's class, we will focus on indirect object pronouns known as complément d'objet indirect or simply c'est, au, I in French. This lesson will be considered as part 2 of the series on direct indirect objects. Today's lesson on COE has been divided into 3 sections. In this first section, I will read out a French text in which the indirect object pronouns occur several times. Then in the next section, I will explain all about these pronouns. And finally, in the third section, we will do an exercise to revise what we learned in today's session. We'll begin the lesson with a French text. This text is about Miss Colette's task of calling up a few parents to inform them about their children's behavior in class. Des écoliers mal élevés. Colette est une jeune enseignante qui est chargée de téléphoner aux parents lorsque leurs enfants se conduisent mal à l'école. Aujourd'hui, elle doit faire 3 appels. Elle prend le téléphone et compose tout d'abord le numéro de Lacombe. Lorsque le téléphone sonne, Madame Lacombe lui répond. Colette lui explique que son fils s'est battu de nouveau contre des enfants pendant la récré. La mère rétorque que son fils lui a dit ce qui s'était passé et que ce n'était pas de sa faute. Mon fils nous a tout expliqué. Thomas et Roland ne sont pas gentils. Mon fils leur a prêté un disque de musique et quand il leur a demandé de le rendre, ils lui ont dit que le disque leur appartenait. Ensuite, c'est le tour de Lavigne. Colette leur téléphone mais personne ne répond. Elle cherche alors un autre numéro pour les rejoindre. Elle trouve le numéro de portable de Monsieur Lavigne. Elle lui téléphone. En attendant que Monsieur Lavigne décroche l'appareil, Colette pense aux cheveux roux de Monsieur Lavigne. Comme sa fille lui ressemble, pense-t-elle avec un petit sourire. Monsieur Lavigne est choqué par le comportement de sa fille et promet à Colette qu'il viendra à l'école l'après-midi pour lui rendre visite. Colette téléphone ensuite au Bertrand. La grand-mère de Gilles décroche l'appareil. Colette lui parle pendant longtemps parce que la vieille dame est très bavarde. Colette lui annonce calmement mais avec fermeté qu'elle est occupée et raccroche avec un soupir de soulagement. La grand-mère ne lui a pas posé de questions sur son petit-fils. Elle voulait simplement lui parler parce qu'elle s'ennuyait à la maison. So this was a short text where the indirect object pronouns, mostly the third person, have been used several times. In the next section, I will explain to you all about these pronouns. In today's lesson, we will focus on the indirect object and the indirect object pronouns. We will first see what the characteristics of an indirect object are, and then I will list out the indirect object pronouns. Let me begin with the features of the indirect object. To give you a better picture, I will compare it to the direct object. Unlike a direct object, which can refer to a person, an animal, or a thing, an indirect object is always an animate being. In a sentence, the indirect object is closely associated with the verb. Similar to the direct object, an indirect object is also the receiver of the verb's action. Now let me tell you about the position of the indirect object. In our previous lesson, I had told you that when the object of a transitive verb is preceded by a preposition, the object is said to be an indirect object. This statement is true but requires a bit more precision. The indirect object of a transitive verb always follows one preposition, and that preposition is a, which means to. Let me give you an example of an indirect object introduced by a. Je parle à Laurence. I am speaking to Laurence. Elle téléphone à son grand frère. She phones her elder brother. In both sentences, the underlined term is the indirect object. In the first sentence, the indirect object consists of a proper name, Laurence. In the second sentence, the indirect object consists of the possessive adjective son, a qualifying adjective grand, and the noun frère. So it's not just the noun but also the determiners which are modifying the noun that are considered to be the indirect object. In these two sentences, the direct object is pretty straightforward. But in more complex sentences, it may be slightly tricky to identify the indirect object. In such cases, always remember that the indirect object is the noun that follows the verb that answers the question to whom. Let me illustrate with an example. Lorsqu'elle voit que sa maison est cambriolée, elle téléphone tout de suite à son grand frère. When she sees her house has been broken into, she immediately phones her elder brother. To find out the indirect object of the verb téléphoner, we ask the question, à qui est-ce qu'elle téléphone? To whom does she phone? And the answer is, elle téléphone à son grand frère. So when unsure about the indirect object, formulate a question with to whom and the transitive verb. With direct objects, the question is formed with who or what and the transitive verb. Now let me show you how sometimes the preposition a can confuse students learning the French language. A tends to contract to o or o with an x when it precedes the definite articles le and les. So when a transitive verb is followed by o or o with an x, students may forget that there is actually a preposition before the object. Let me illustrate this with examples. Une infirmière rend visite à la patiente. A nurse visits the female patient. Une infirmière rend visite au patient. A nurse visits the male patient. Une infirmière rend visite au patient. A nurse visits the patients. In the first sentence, it is clear that patiente is an indirect object. The preposition a plainly indicates this. But in the next two sentences, a changes to o, which is the contracted form of a plus le, and o with an x, which is the contracted form of a plus les. Here it is possible to overlook the fact that passion and patient with an s are indirect objects because the preposition a is not explicitly marked. So now that you know what the indirect object of a verb is and how to identify one, let me now explain to you what an indirect object pronoun is. A pronoun is always a word that replaces a noun or a phrase previously mentioned in order to avoid repetition. So an indirect object pronoun, or COE, that is complément d'objet indirect, is a pronoun that replaces an indirect object. In French, there are 6 indirect object pronouns, plus 2 more if we count the forms that change due to elision. To me, me or m apostrophe; to you, the or t apostrophe; to him or to her, lui; to us, nous; to you all, vous; to them, leur. As you can see, apart from the third person singular and plural, the remaining indirect object pronouns are the same as the direct object pronouns. I will illustrate each COE with an example. Le professeur me parle, the teacher speaks to me. Le professeur te parle, the teacher speaks to you. Le professeur lui parle, the teacher speaks to him or to her. Le professeur nous parle, the teacher speaks to us. Le professeur vous parle, the teacher speaks to you all. Le professeur leur parle, the teacher speaks to them. 3 things can be observed from these examples: the single form of the third person singular, the position of the direct object pronoun, and the phenomenon of elision with certain forms. We'll take up each of these points one by one. A single form of the third person singular. With direct object pronouns, the third person singular had 2 forms, but with indirect object pronouns, the third person singular has only one form, lui. In other words, lui can mean to him or to her. Paul ressemble à son père. Il lui ressemble. He resembles him, his father. Pauline ressemble à sa mère. Elle lui ressemble. She resembles her, her mother. In the text, we have several examples of this. Madame Lacombe lui répond. Madame Lacombe répond à l'enseignante. Mrs. Lacombe replies to her, to the teacher. Colette leur téléphone. Colette téléphone au Lavigne. Colette phones the Lavigne. Position of the indirect object pronoun. The position of the indirect object pronoun is the same as that of the direct object pronoun. The indirect object pronoun always precedes the verb whose object it is. If the verb is conjugated in a compound tense, such as the compound past, the indirect object pronoun will precede the auxiliary verb. Elle a demandé à ses parents. Elle leur a demandé. She asked them, her parents. Elle a demandé à son mari. Elle lui a demandé. She asked him, her husband. In the text, we have an example like this. Mon fils nous a tout expliqué. Mon fils a tout expliqué à nous. My son has explained everything to us. If the sentence has 2 verbs, the indirect object pronoun is placed immediately before the second verb. Elle veut plaire à sa fille. Elle veut lui plaire. She wants to please her, her daughter. Elle veut plaire à ses enfants. Elle veut leur plaire. She wants to please them, her children. Here is an example like this from the text. Elle voulait simplement lui parler parce qu'elle s'ennuyait à la maison. Elle voulait simplement parler à Colette parce qu'elle s'ennuyait à la maison. She simply wanted to speak to her because she was getting bored at home. To her refers to Colette. When the sentence is in the negative form, ne precedes the indirect object pronoun. Les enfants n'obéissent pas à Jacques. Les enfants ne lui obéissent pas. The children don't obey him, Jack. Les enfants n'obéissent pas à Sylvie. Les enfants ne lui obéissent pas. The children don't obey her, Sylvie. Les enfants n'obéissent pas aux parents. Les enfants ne leur obéissent pas. The children don't obey them, parents. There is one example like this in the text as well. La grand-mère ne lui a pas posé des questions sur son petit-fils. La grand-mère n'a pas posé des questions à Colette. The grandmother didn't ask the teacher any questions regarding her grandson. Elision. The phenomenon of elision is observed only for me and te when the following verb, transitive verb or the auxiliary verb, begins with a vowel or a mute h. With direct object pronouns, the elision occurs with the third person singular as well. But it doesn't happen with Louis. Mon chien m'obéit. My dog obeys me. Ton chien ne t'obéit pas? Your dog doesn't obey you? I will touch upon one final point before summarizing the lesson on indirect object pronouns or COE, which is their French equivalent. As was the case with direct objects, here too the English equivalent of certain transitive verbs may take a direct object, while their French equivalent takes an indirect object. For example, j'ai demandé à mes enfants de ne pas faire du bruit. I've asked my children not to make any noise. Nous avons rendu visite à nos grands-parents. We visited our grandparents. Additionally, there are a handful of verbs that are always followed by the preposition à, such as parler à quelqu'un, to speak to someone, dire à quelqu'un, to say to someone, demander à quelqu'un, to ask someone, poser une question à quelqu'un, to ask a question to someone, répondre à quelqu'un, to answer someone. If the object of these transitive verbs is an inanimate object, the pronoun I will be used instead. For example, il répond à la question. Il y répond. He answers it, the question. Now let me quickly summarize the lesson. When the preposition a precedes the object of a transitive verb, the object is known as an indirect object. The 6 inflected forms of the indirect object pronouns are me, te, lui, nous, vous, leur. The first 2 singular forms change to M' and T' when the following verb begins with a vowel or a mute h. The third person singular has one form, lui. Lui translates as to him or to her. When the indirect object pronoun is used instead of the direct object, it precedes the verb. When the verb is conjugated in a compound tense, such as the compound past, the COE precedes the auxiliary verb. This position, however, does not involve any past participle agreement as it would with direct object pronouns. In this third section, we will revise what we learned in today's session on indirect object pronouns. A short exercise has been provided. We need to replace the indirect object with the appropriate COE and make whatever changes may be necessary. Monsieur Leblanc téléphone au commissaire de police. Au commissaire de police is the indirect object which refers to the third person singular. Hence, it can be replaced with lui. The COE will precede the verb. Monsieur Leblanc lui téléphone. This sentence translates as Mr. Leblanc phones him, that is the police chief. J'ai parlé au client. Au client is the indirect object, which refers to the third person plural. Hence, it can be replaced with leur. The COE will precede the auxiliary verb. Je leur ai parlé. This sentence translates as I have spoken to them, the clients. Nous devons rendre visite à Pascal. À Pascal is the indirect object which refers to the third person singular. Hence, it can be replaced with lui. The COE will precede the main verb. Nous devons lui rendre visite. This sentence translates as we must visit him, Pascal. Vous n'obéissez pas à votre mère? Votre mère is the indirect object which refers to the third person singular. Hence, it can be replaced with lui. The COE will follow ne. Vous ne lui obéissez pas? This sentence translates as don't you obey her, your mother. Ils disent la vérité à leurs parents. À leurs parents is the indirect object which refers to the third person plural. Hence, it can be replaced with leur. The COE will precede the verb. Ils leur disent la vérité. This sentence translates as they tell them the truth. Them refers to their parents. With this, we come to the end of our fourth lesson. This lesson was divided into 3 sections. In the first section, I read out a French text in which the indirect object pronouns occurred several times. In the second section, I explained all about these pronouns. And finally, in the third section, we revised today's lesson by doing an exercise. I hope you enjoyed today's session. In the next class, we'll learn how to replace the objects when a sentence contains both direct and indirect objects. I hope to see you in the next session. Thank you and à bientôt. See you soon.